Hi, welcome back. I want to share something, a special episode from the Garden of Eden. I had a birthday last week. People on Facebook knew that. I got a lot of nice wishes from all over the world in at least 4 different languages, in French and Spanish. Someone sent me in Yiddish. I appreciated that. So I had a thought about my 53rd birthday, and so I want to share that with you. It's about marriage. I have some beautiful psychology from Carl Gustav Jung, the great Swiss psychologist, friend of Freud, as well as some American history for history buffs. So here it is. So I turned 53, and 53 in Gematria is Nun Gimel, or Gimel Nun, which is the Hebrew word Gan, which is a garden. So Gan is also the word for nursery school. So maybe being 53, I'm back at nursery school, but I don't really think so. I don't really want to go back to nursery school. I have mixed memories of that period in my life. But I thought of Gan as Gan Eden, the Garden of Eden. And I do relate very much to the Garden of Eden. And my wife and I say we live together in the Garden of Eden. And so I want to share with you an insight about marriage and the Garden of Eden, of how to be there. So again, it's a midlife thing. I'm 53. We've been married almost 30 years. I want to tell you that. We're celebrating our 30th anniversary in this year in the summer. So it's something to celebrate. And marriage is something that takes constant work. It doesn't come easy really to anybody. You're living with another person who's totally different, a different gender, and different from you. So you have to work at it and invest in it and be thoughtful and work on yourself and develop and grow in this field. So I want to talk about that. The pillar of the Torah is to love thy neighbor as thyself. And the one person that it's most likely that you may be able to begin to fulfill that very difficult mitzvah is your spouse. Because who could you really love like yourself except your spouse? And I'm going to show you even the language of the Rambam that's going to hint at that. So let me start with this sort of famous verse that the artists certainly have loved. Vayu shneim arumim ha'adam ve'ishtoi v'lo yizbo shashu. And the two of them were naked, man and his wife, and they felt no shame. So we've all seen the pictures in the illustrated Bibles, right? It was sort of, as a kid, it was sort of shocking that there was a naked lady in the picture. And so I took here from Chagall, a pretty chaste picture, I think. Also the Garden of Eden, you see the tree there, an angel, maybe, I don't know if that's a snake at the bottom, but whatever. I have another beautiful picture here of the Garden of Eden. So what about nudity with your spouse? So, look at the Shulchan Aruch and that'll tell you about that topic in a practical way. But I wanted to talk in a more poetic, abstract way, an interpretation of this verse. And it talks about, in the literature, there's something called Adam v'Chava koidem lechet. Before the sin, Adam and Chava were on a very, very high level. I'll just give you an example of why they felt no shame despite their nakedness. It's sort of like an X-ray. An X-ray is actually not embarrassing. I know that in the airport when they take your pictures, they say they can't really see you. Skin, being nude without clothing and your skin is a cause for shame. We wear clothes and our clothes give us honor. But in the very early times of the creation of man in the Garden of Eden, this was before they even had skin. They were more like a hologram. And so they felt no shame. But again, I'm done talking about nudity. I want to talk about marriage. So the Rambam has a real lot about marriage, of course. There's a real lot of Talmud about marriage, Masechtas Ksubis and Kiddushin, Yevamos. So the Rambam has a beautiful halacha in the 15th parak, says, V'chein tzivu chachamim she'adam mechabed es ishto yoyser migufoi v'oyhava kegufo. The Rambam says that the sages commanded us that a man should honor his wife more than himself and love her as himself, kegufo, like his person, like his body. So you should give more honor to your wife even than you give yourself, and you should love her like yourself. So that's a key to a happy marriage. If a husband's going to do that, so then it's going to be really good for both of them. And of course, the Rambam has a recipe also for a wife that she should honor her husband greatly and try to do his will, etc. I left that off. In any case, it's a two-way street. But what I wanted to share here is about metaphorical nudity. And what I mean by that is the following. I put here a picture of the life cycle according to Jung. And okay, it's sort of poetic, the idea of spring, summer, autumn, and then winter. Life starts for many creatures in the spring. Of course, not all people are born in the spring, but it's, again, a metaphor here. You're young, you go through adolescence, you're at the top of your game. And then as you begin to get over the hill, we have an expression, a person is over the hill, there's a midlife crisis. You realize, I'm not as strong as I used to be. I can't keep doing the things the way I used to, or at all the way I used to. And I'm now in the autumn of my time. And so the age of 53, I mean, the lifespan is getting longer and longer. Halavai, I should live to be 106. But midlife is, not specifically divided, your lifespan divided by 2. It's, of course, a range and a period in one's life. And so I'm in that period. And I think I want to talk about it today, though, as a period in marriage. And it's a period where you realize your limitations and your flaws. And I'm talking about deep character flaws, because nobody is perfect. And a person who has one set of great attributes, has also some serious and severe flaws. But at this point in your marriage, if you've been married 10, 15, 20, 30 years, you know your spouse's attributes and you know their flaws. In shidduchim, or in a period of courtship, when you're still finding your spouse, it's sort of a marketing period. And then there's a period when you first get married, newlyweds, and they're in love. And that's like a drug. And so you see all these wonderful things in your spouse. And that's great. And that's true. And Hashem put that in the Bria, l'sameach chatan v'kalat, that they should rejoice one with another and see only the good. But there gets to be a stage in marriage where, okay, you get down, you sort of hit the ground. And now it's a question of what's called warts and all, of loving your spouse, even with their warts and everything else. And this includes their true and real character flaws. And these character flaws have outcomes, right? You lose money because of them. You may have to sell your house. Your kids don't turn out the way you wanted them because you or your spouse. I'm not just talking about forgetting to put the cap back on the toothpaste, which every morning, you could deal with that. But, you really should move on and realize, okay, my spouse is different than me, and they have other attributes and they're not the same as me, and that's okay. I can accept them. And this is where I wanted to talk about lo yizboshashu, that we get to a stage in our lives and in our marriage, and it's a question, of course, of self-acceptance. And here I'm talking about spousal acceptance, of realizing that with my spouse's imperfections, I still love him or her. And even though I've suffered real pain because of who my spouse is and how they treat me, the kids, our finances, in-laws, everything. So I'm in the autumn of life, and things have impact and change our future. But I sort of know it all now. I've seen it. I've seen this picture before. After 30 years, I know that, okay, my wife usually, fails in certain tests or certain things. So I'm open for growth and she's open to grow and so forth. But I know the outcome usually in this stuff, and I'm okay with that. And I have these serious flaws and imperfections that there's certain things I'm really not good at. So we've actually decided that my wife takes care of those things that I'm not good at, and I try to take care of the things she's not good at. And so we're in the Garden of Eden, because we're both naked in that sense that we know each other and we know when we're getting to a problematic place. And then we accept that, and we're not ashamed of that anymore. So we're, again, in a figurative sense, we're uncovered, and yet we don't feel a sense of shame or betrayal or anger or tension, because we've reached acceptance, self-acceptance, and spousal acceptance. So this allows us to be lo yizboshashu, we're not ashamed, and we feel we can therefore get into deep joy. Jung talks about this sense of individuation, is the term he uses, when a person comes to peace with themselves. And again, he's talking about yourself, and I'm talking about also with your spouse, because it's Shnaim Shem Echad, it's two that become one. And when you get to that place, I call it the Garden of Eden. So you're in a really good place. I want to give an example, and it's sort of funny that to bring an example about marriage, I'm going to talk about two men who weren't married to one another. But it's hard to, know what happened in other people's marriages. I don't read a lot of books like that. But this is a fascinating story from American Civil War history. Two great generals of the North. Just to remind you, when the Civil War started, it was not obvious who would win. The South had a lot of great generals. Robert E. Lee and others, Stonewall Jackson. Anyway, things happened and so forth. Part of the victory of the North, it had to do with other things, industry, and then the British and the French stayed out. But here's what I want to talk about. Ulysses Grant, who became president, of course, and William Tecumseh Sherman, both born in Ohio, where I'm from. And these are two, I mean, Sherman was ruthless and he burned the South in the scorched earth policy. But in terms of winning the war, they were really important. And they have serious character flaws. Listen to this. Grant, it says here he wasn't a drunkard, but he essentially was an alcoholic. He had a weakness for alcohol, that it was a family thing. His grandfather basically became a nothing because of his alcoholism, and Grant had that. His wife was really careful to keep him on the wagon, but when he was away from his wife for extended periods, he had some officers around him who also tried to protect him, and he was successful, and he had tremendous self-discipline, but he sometimes fell off the wagon. But he managed it that he never made a major military or political decision while inebriated. So he would get drunk at off hours or when he could afford to get drunk, and he would stay dry and clean when he needed to be. So that's called managing your alcoholism. And Grant was good at that. And so he became president and, you know, he was okay. I'm not getting into his general order to expel all the Jews from a certain place, the Tennessee department. That happened and it's shocking, but I don't think that it may have to do a little bit with this. He may not have known about the order because he was drunk. But in any case, I'm skipping that chapter right now and just talking about Grant as someone who suffered from alcoholism, but was able to manage it. Sherman was not an alcoholic, but listen to this. Stationed in Kentucky, his pessimism about the outlook of the war led to a nervous breakdown that required him to be briefly put on leave. He recovered by forging a close partnership with General Ulysses S. Grant. So Grant and Sherman, again, they won the war for the North, and they each have a serious character flaw that prevents them from accomplishing their duties and essentially reaching their destiny, which was saving the United States of America from the Confederacy, from secession. Our world would have been totally different and probably much worse had the US split at that time, forgetting the issue of slavery. Anyway, so there's actually recorded dialogue between Grant and Sherman, where after the war, they're sort of reminiscing, and Grant says, you know, Sherman, you saved me because you stayed with me when I was drunk. And Sherman says, well, you stayed with me when I was crazy. And that's what I wanted to capture here. That a lot of times in marriage, you know, you have periods of stress. And of course, marriage has its ups and downs. You're sometimes in shallow water and, you know, almost hitting the rocks. And of course, the marriage could be on the rocks. And sometimes you're sailing in smooth waters. But if this one spouse can be there for the other when they're in a moment of weakness, a period of weakness or depression, or struggling with illness or alcoholism or whatever we deal with. Again, we're flawed people. Kadosh Baruch Hu put us on this earth to deal with stuff. What my grandfather called hitting the curveball. Hashem throws us curves to see how we deal with them and those challenges. And sometimes people fail in their tests and challenges. But if you're there for your spouse through those hard times, you can achieve great things together. And essentially, you can stay in the Garden of Eden. So with that, I end my birthday wish to you all that you should have a great year. It's a new year of 2021 on our calendar. And you should be good to yourselves and, of course, to your spouse. To the man, I say, honor your wife, yoisimi gufo, more than yourself, and love her as yourself. And if we will do that and really share the love and the honor, we can truly live in the Garden of Eden. Thanks for being here.